Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Nicole Testa-Boston, the Deputy Director here at Fiat, and I wanted to welcome all of you to our Technology Tuesday webinar series, where we're going to be talking about information resource mapping to support advanced work packaging and a new project that Fiat is just launching. Before we go ahead and introduce our speakers today, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the GoToMeeting system and how you can use it over the next hour. You'll notice that that toolbar on your screen is unique to you. At any time, you can minimize that by clicking the orange arrow at the top. You will also notice that you are on a defaulted mute setting, and that's due to the number of attendees on this call. We do welcome participation and feedback. In fact, we'd like to hear what you're thinking and answer any questions that you may have. And to do that, you can click on the Questions tab on that toolbar and type in any comments or questions that you may have. Those will go directly to me, and I will facilitate and moderate a Q&A with Reg and Ted once they have completed their presentation. So if we do run out of time, they'll follow up with you privately after the webinar as well. And then lastly, we are recording this session, both the audio and the slides, and we will have a copy of this available on the Fiat website at fiatech.org. in a day or two. Give us a couple days to package it up and post it online, and you will be able to then download it and share it with colleagues. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce Ted Blackman with IntelliWave. They are a member, and Ted is the president and CEO of the company. It's a global leader in providing world-class RFID and GPS materials tracking solutions for large industrial construction projects. As one of the original Fiat participants, Ted was previously the founder and president of Common Point, where he helped to pioneer the market for 4D BIM, as well as set the standard for advanced work packaging with the invention of the ConstructSim and OpSim software platforms. Following the acquisition of Common Point by Bentley Systems in 2008, Dr. Blackman served as VP of Construction for Bentley Systems, where he helped define the company's vision, direction, and strategy for the construction software market. Prior to launching Common Point, Dr. Blackman was a team member of the highly successful Mars Pathfinder mission in 1997, having developed and operated the Mars Map system at JPL's Mission Control to plan the daily activities for the Sojourner rover through a virtual model. With the help of NASA, he later commercialized the advanced technology for Mars rover control and delivered a robotic 3D imaging and planning system as part of the Chernobyl remediation effort. Dr. Blackman received his BS in mechanical engineering from Penn State University and his PhD from UC Berkeley in 1998. He was honored with the Penn State Young Alumni Achievement Award in '05. And you might be interested to know, Ted, one of our keynote speakers at the technology conference next month is John Grotzinger, who was the chief scientist for the Mars rover mission. So you guys will have something to talk about, hopefully. And I do want to encourage everyone else on this call, too, before we get started, to please be sure to register for the conference that's coming up March 25th to the 27th in San Antonio. Joining Ted is Reg Hunter. I think all of you know him or should have met him by now. Reg is our Senior Program Director at Fiat. He leads our procurement and supply network areas and has recently taken on the new materials, methods, equipment, and product section for Fiat. He's got a number of new projects going. This is one of many. So if you don't know Reg, and I'm assuming most of you do, please send him an email. It's hunter@fiatech.org, and he'll provide his contacts at the end of this session as well. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to you, Ted.
Thanks, Nicole. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. Both Reg and I have a background in aerospace and are a bit of a bird of a feather in that sense. And from that perspective, you're sure to get an information-packed presentation here. And please do follow up if there's any additional information or detail regarding the presentation. So moving forward, this is a new project that's just getting kicked off. And it's all about advanced work packaging, and part of what you're going to learn today is well, what is that? And but there's also challenges in implementing it. It holds a lot of promise. There's extremely high potential benefit, but it also takes coordination amongst team members. So the part of our theme is passing of the baton. And from that, what we're trying to drill down in this project is getting better clarity on where is the information produced, what's required to support advanced work packaging, where is that information produced, where is it consumed, and how do you go about winning the race. I'm going to, at this point, hand it off to Reg to give a little bit of a further background into the project and let him talk a little bit about Fiat as well.
Great. Thank you, Ted. Well, what's sort of interesting about Ted's background and mine being in aerospace, when we sit in meetings, and I don't know about you, Ted, but when people point out that this isn't rocket science, why is it so difficult? I can tell you that I've done a lot of exo-atmospheric experiments for Star Wars and things like that, and launched a bunch of different kinds of missiles, and I can tell you this industry and the challenges we face are much more difficult. And so, to be honest with you, whenever anyone brings it up, I kind of don't get it, because we have a lot of challenges and a lot of interesting people and a lot of different ways to go about solving them. So what's nice and interesting about Fiat is it really represents an aggregation of subject matter experts, at least to me. And so you start off with industry challenges, is what you see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen here. Frequently what happens is that different owners and EPCs are trying to address those on their own, and it turns out you can't reach a tipping point. And so by moving into the Fiat environment and becoming a member, you have a framework to build consensus and collaborate with your peers so that you can essentially better understand the issues and understand potential solutions and work toward solving a problem that you jointly agree about. And then obviously at the end of the day, you really want to have an optimal deployable solution. Okay. So next slide. So these are interesting logos, and clearly a lot of very intelligent people are involved in it. I think what really is most important takeaway here is that within the next 3 slides, you see the types of companies that are involved in advancing productivity through participation on projects within Fiat. Let me go to the next slide. And so for me, it's like I would argue, and I think it's totally true, there's virtually nothing that this industry is confronting that the members within Fiat can't find a solution for, as well as the partners, as you see on this slide. Okay, I think. So with respect, there's a Fiat's roadmap for providing holistic approach to productivity improvement, and there's actually multiple categories. And this one, go ahead and click. This project actually is being aligned with Intelligent Automated Construction Job Site. So there's multiple projects with respect to each one of these different elements, and we can talk about that sometime. If you want more information, just send me an email. I'll be happy to fill you in. Okay. I think, Ted, you want to go ahead and elaborate on this, or?
Sure, and Reg, if we need to tag team a little bit, it's real important to understand some of the motivation. Work packaging is not new, but taking a new approach. And whenever we're saying advanced work packaging, one of the key concepts is the best use of information technology tools to support the work packaging process. And you're going to hear a few terms and learn of a few terms like IWP, which stands for Installation Work Packaging, which is a sub-element of the overall framework of advanced work packaging. But the installation work packaging goes right to the heart of the workers in the field. And it's been identified as one of the means to increase productivity, safety, quality, predictability, and schedule performance at the job site. You really got to put it in context of a larger effort. And so whenever installation work packaging can align best with upfront engineering work packages and construction work packages, as well as put into an overall framework of existing safety and productivity programs, the promise to address up to potentially 25% could possibly be achieved. And those type of claims are, how should I say, hard to 100% substantiate, but I've seen it work in action. And so from direct experience, I can say that the potential is there. But one of the challenges, you've got to have the stars aligned, and it takes right to the point, it takes stakeholder alignment and participation in the effort. And so even though often I get feedback that installation work packaging, well, that may not be my responsibility because I'm the EPC and more in charge of construction management, I often cringe because I suddenly, I understand well enough that if the engineering and construction management aren't aligned with supporting the use of a constructor in being able to benefit from the information technology aspects, it's one of the major batons that can easily get dropped. And why is it important? Well, the chart below shows that out of a typical workday of 8 hours, that there's very little of that time actually spent on direct work. A little bit over 2 of those hours. So being able to address that and see how we can get that productivity up is a key aspect of what it's all about here in terms of the motivation. This is also building upon corresponding initiatives in advanced work packaging and related efforts of 4D, 5D BIM. And without going into each one of these efforts, please do follow up. But there's initiatives going on underway with the CII, and that's actually in collaboration with the construction owners of Alberta. And as you get outside of the plant industry and you look at its relevance in the building trades and some of the civil infrastructure, there's a very interesting initiative called 5DI that has direct alignment with this in terms of how can an information model generated during engineering be used to further support the fabrication and construction processes. And if you're asking yourself, well, what is advanced work packaging all about? Again, given that work packages is something that the industry has done for years in one form or another, part of the advanced work packaging effort within CII and COA was just defining it as a best practice, getting the terminology down, but it also introduces the concept of leveraging information technology. And one of the things that gets me excited is right at the heart of that, the idea of leveraging a 3D model in tying in information from procurement, materials management, turnover, project management, project controls, and being able to then go in and allow constructors in more of a video game-like environment rather than an engineering environment rapidly click on elements in the model to define the scope of a FIW or an IWP, which is the installation set, or on the upper right-hand side, defining the scope of a test package and being able to visually see that. So instead of just using traditional drawings, and what's happened over the past 10 years has been an advancement of a set of software tools ranging from ConstructSim with Bentley C3D, which is actually an internal tool, outstanding, with CCC as an international contractor. And then you've got an Intergraph and a Viva, Vico, Synchro, and these aren't the only set of tools, but I'd say represent substantially the leaders in this area of leveraging the information model into the field. But it's a challenge, and how to bring the information in. If it's a self-contained project where all of the engineering and all of the constructors are using a single tool, you'd think it's easier, but the reality is it's not, because a lot of the information isn't in the 3D model initially, and you need to correlate it with the model. So you end up having a number of software systems inevitably that are used, and often a number of design platforms. There's not a single project where where I've seen where all of the design is done, because much of the information needed to support advanced work packaging may not emanate just in the engineering model, but can also come from the fabricator. And so this next slide I'm showing emphasizes the fact that to support this advanced work packaging and even installation work packaging takes a coordinated effort among a number of project phases and project stakeholders. And so you're certainly familiar with the life cycle concepts of construction, going from engineering through commissioning and startup. And if we flatten that down and then look at not just the phases, but also the type of project participants, you'll see that broadening the concept of advanced work packaging, one of the terms that you'll need to become familiar with is EWPs, which stands for engineering work packages. And it's where the engineer, working with the owner, subdivides the project into areas and units, and then trades and disciplines to do the design, delivering that to a construction manager who then extends it into the construction work packages. One of the key aspects that came out of the joint COA CII initiative is that the construction work packages conceptually should be developed before the engineering work packages, as well as the turnover system packages. So even though you're not executing that work until later in the project, one of the key ideas is that turnover and the needs of how the owner needs to have the plant turned over, and in what timing and in what sequence, should have an influence and driver on the construction work packages, which are by and large are geographically driven. and represent disciplines and trades working in areas. And then the construction work package sequencing should have a direct influence in pulling information from the engineering work packages. So even though you initially think that, well, there's a timeline in the development of these, the non-intuitive aspect is that ideally you'd be developing your turnover packages to drive your construction work packages, at least at a conceptual level, with information flowing into them. And then there's a subdivision of construction work packages down into installation work packages. Whereas one of the points I mentioned before, at a construction management level, your construction work packages are under best practices aligned with your level 3 or level 4 construction schedule. So they represent a broader scope of work that executes over the period of potentially months in alignment with a work breakdown structure and a schedule. Your installation work packages get down to crew size chunking of the work, in which the materials could be pulled, the drawings could be delivered, and they represent that some work over the period of a week or an entire shift of perhaps 10 days. If you're working, depending upon the crew size, you would want to chunk it down. And similarly, the turnover system packages chunk down into test packages. And then, of course, these packages have alignment. And one of the key things in terms of leveraging information technology, the most simple aspect is that where your tag, your asset ID information, the pipe spool or the steel beam or the valve number should correspond and be equivalent throughout these levels of packages. But as you look at it, just take the installation work packages for a moment, and then look at a constructor as opposed to a construction manager who is responsible for the development and execution of those work packages. Again, that constructor is not standing alone. They're critically dependent upon information flows and coordination efforts, between from the engineer and the construction manager, and as I mentioned before, key information that a fabricator might have. And this just is a typical representation, but I show the baton. If you can't understand what that symbol is there in between these data flows, is showing that that's not a one-time handoff. There's an ongoing routine information exchange that's required in addition to human coordination, and that's where inconsistency can drive in. So as major projects look to take the advantage of advanced work packaging, the aspect of this coordination of information exchange that occurs introduces an element of unpredictability and lack of consistency, where sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And to date, there's not really a well understood document layout of what are the information requirements and how could those be potentially embedded into contract specifications to drive an element of consistency. And so this idea of the convergence of information, where information needed to support advanced work packaging and through the use of a virtual construction tool or other tools where you may not have 3D model information, but you may be developing packages for electrical cable tray and don't have a very rich 3D graphical information model. You're still dependent upon information supplies. And over on the left, seeing the type of information supplies, emphasizing my point again, as a constructor, you're dependent upon information from engineering and from procurement and from fabrication, logistics. Maybe you have control over site materials, or maybe that's a shared control with the construction manager. And so these information streams that you're needing not only is a 3D model with a well-attributed set of tag information, but again, the reality is there's information from scheduling and from estimating and what is actually being broken into the model as shop detailing occurs in fabrication, when are materials going to be delivered, because one of the key aspects of this installation work packaging approach is that you should be sending quality work to the field, work that's executable, where you have all of the information in place, where safety checks have been performed. And that level of constraint analysis takes loading up that information model or that virtual construction model with information that often the constructor doesn't actually control. And there's producers and publishers of that information in a dynamic environment where enabling those streams of information is key. I don't want to list out each individual element of this, but the project has had a lot of thought, and in a sense we've jump-started it in its pre-initiation stage, and this represents the type of applications that are in use in the industry today. And so, you know, going back to the previous slide and showing the convergence of information, it's not that this information does not exist. It's not that we don't understand what that information is. And furthermore, it's not that there's not a wealth of applications that support the publication of that information and, again, are used by various participants in the project. So we really have a good understanding of what's out there. And what excites me, and it ties back into Reg's point, is this is not trivial, but it's absolutely solvable. It's, you know, you could say it's not rocket science, but having the experience of doing data level integration and mission control, and yes, it was over a decade ago, but it's still highly relevant. You know, you're bringing together information sources from a variety of systems. And in this, it's project-driven environment with multiple stakeholders, it represents a challenging problem that gets me excited. And as we look at the endpoint vision, this isn't where the project will end up with, but it's ultimately what, through this project, we can achieve as a collective community, is building upon other projects within Fiat Tech, such as the ISO 15926 effort, other standards in information, extending that beyond the engineering realm to tie in your purchasing systems, your shop detailing and fabrication tracking, going through CPM scheduling, site materials management, quantity tracking, where you're keeping track of the detailed of what's been fabricated or what's been installed, you know, through the closeout of QA/QC completion tools, where you're doing the handover and collection of the information, that those tools could participate in a open source integrated service bus where the applications themselves can remain independent but be tied together. And I envision that this concept of a package, where traditionally those packages would be built, and even if tools were used, and some of the experience that I directly had as the inventor of ConstructSim, where a virtual model would be used to build a package, either a construction work package or an installation work package, but then documents were being pulled out of a document management system, printed, and put into a physical binder, right? Historically, these packages represent physical binders that get put into, posted up on a shelf or put into a filing cabinet. You know, why not have those packages become electronic? And even if there are printed copies of them, they would not only contain the traditional information that goes into a printed package, but contain data that's being produced by applications, such that, and sometimes that data may be a data contract, where that data is not a one-time exchange, as I said, but also, you know, could support dynamic exchange, but where the packages themselves embed data artifacts that are either published at a revision control level or dynamic data exchanges that become contract deliverables. This industry works off of deliverables, and if we can get those deliverables as data deliverables and embedded into the packages themselves, I think we can achieve great things in this industry. So with that as kind of the excited level introductory background, I'm going to turn the baton back over to Reg to more carefully walk you through, here's what we're envisioning on this AWP information resource mapping project.
Great, Ted. Thank you very much. I am also monitoring questions. If you have questions that you would like to discuss, please send them, and Nicole and/or I will ask Ted, and we'll work through them. I did get a comment that there's some audio intermittence concern, although I haven't heard that from anyone else, but hopefully you're able to hear this clearly. I'm able to hear Ted very clearly. So let us know if you're having trouble with that. And again, like Nicole said, this is being recorded, so it'll be available online. What's nice about our new approach to dealing with projects is that invariably what we want to do is have a webinar like this to help jumpstart people's understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So over the course of executing a project, if someone new comes on board and joins Fiat Tech, becomes a member and wants to participate in the project, they can go to this webinar or any other webinars and essentially jumpstart their understanding. So for example, a few weeks ago we had a webinar on predictive performance tools from Clemson. It's another one of our projects that was able to look at the movement of materials and anticipate whether or not the project was under stress. So what you see on your screen now is essentially a preliminary approach to how we would address this project, and I'm not going to read through all of it, but hopefully you're sort of reading in the background anyway. But clearly we want to know what are the linkages with respect to the CII studies and the work packaging efforts and evaluations and recommendations that came out of RT 272, which essentially defined certain behaviors and certain recommendations with respect to that. Oh, you're muted, not me. Okay. There's looking at various initiatives that are both within Fiat Tech as well as with our partners relating to interoperability and use cases to drive what are the information needs and the attributes and drive through that. So basically, there's a whole sequence of incrementally addressing this project and developing a solution that's deployable and providing the information to the interoperability folks to essentially provide continuity all the way through to the image that you were shown previously by Ted. Okay, next slide. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, good. So essentially, unlike, in contrast perhaps to CII, Fiat Tech tries to drive very quickly toward providing very near-term benefits, and CI is very disciplined and very good at best practices and collaborations across a large community of both owners and EPCs. And then at times what will happen is that CI will look to Fiat Tech to say, okay, well, how would you go about helping us to augment what we're doing in order to make this more realizable? And so this project is a good example of that. And so as you can see on the slide here, our intent is to have some preliminary information pretty much completed by the end of the third quarter this year. Okay. Next slide. So with respect to what we've accomplished so far is we've sent out some preliminary questions and had some dialogue with various owners about what they thought about the project and what they would recommend, and we're converting what they've said into a project plan that we're starting to generate now. We've met with CII and we're hoping to meet with COA about what their expectations and views are and what their needs are in order to help advance their efforts. Generating the business case, we're also working on concepts. If you think about what Ted talked about, this could be a very it's not complicated in the sense of being solvable. What's challenging is that we need to come up with an elegant way to put the information into a framework that allows our members, both owners and EPCs, to capitalize on it. So, obviously you can have a very big spreadsheet that shows all this information, but there may be an alternative that we would like to talk with you about if you have some ideas with respect to that. So this is the webinar that's kicking off this project, and we really would like you to get engaged and help us advance this project. I think it's getting a lot of high visibility. For example, with respect to people that have signed up for this webinar alone, we had 12 owners sign up and 36 EPCs and 27 enabling technology providers. And so there's a considerable amount of interest in this. And what we really want to do is make sure that we drive it forward. And so if we've got 2 more slides here.
Well, Reg, let me jump in and amplify that point as well. I really want to build upon something you said in there, which is, we want to produce in a rapid time frame usable results. Something theoretical where we just pontificate about what could be is not what certainly I'm interested in, and I think I represent the community broadly to say it's not what the member companies are interested in necessarily as well. Coming out of this project with something that's demonstratable, something that can be taken and then leveraged into projects so that we come out with a usable result that isn't just a demonstration that was done on the side, but something that's repeatable, something that can drive an element of consistency in how these projects implement advanced work packaging from a technology perspective. Because as we drive that consistency so that then there's reference models in terms of the type of data that needs to be exchanged that can be embedded down into contractual specifications, I think that then we can deliver results. And again, not just have this be an exercise in what if or what could be.
He dropped out. Okay. You there, Ted?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you just dropped out. The last few words dropped out, but good. So one of the things early on, what we were talking about is how to kind of think about this in an overall way. And if you consider the CII study 272 and you read through it, it's very interesting and it's very good. So you could envision, and I have no basis for what I'm going to say here, but you can envision a scenario where you might have an RFP from an owner for a new refinery, for example, and what they may ask for. Do you have processes and methodologies in place that are consistent with RT 272? And also, have you mapped your information resources and developed your processes to capitalize on information within your existing systems in order to augment that? And so those are sort of I guess perhaps the way to think about this, that this is a way to essentially know where the information is and appreciate the quality of the information and who really is owning the information as opposed to deriving the information. And so what you can do when we get done with this project is essentially know I need these information resources and I need them to be able to to develop this installation work package, for example, or any of the other work packages. And so there's a mapping of the data that allows you to do that, which is the culmination of this project. Okay, next slide. So at our Fiat conference, which, as you know, is next month, we're going to have a short session, which is WorkFace Planning Information Resource Mapping. It's to help those that are at the conference that didn't participate in the webinar and help jumpstart it. Terry Eckhart's going to be making that presentation. We're also working with a number of other EPCs to participate in providing their interest. And so obviously it'd be great if you could come to the conference and sit through that. And then we have a workshop after the conference. Next slide. This is the roll your sleeves up, lock the door, don't go out until you work through these things type meeting. And so we'll provide a little bit of background with respect to what is workplace planning, but not much. The intent here is to take it to the next level. And so what we really want to do is understand the challenges and opportunities and benefits and various initiatives that have been directed at advancing work packaging. And then we also would like to, as far as background, have EPCs to get up and share what their experience has been with respect to work packaging and workplace planning. And I've talked to a number of different folks that are real excited about doing that. So it's interesting. It's interesting when you have the voice of experience and the people that are engaged and involved in this getting up and talk. So we're real excited about that. The next thing we'll be working through is what are the project objectives and deliverables, and reach consensus on that. Define ground rules that relate to what we can and can't do, and make sure that we articulate how we're going to advance this. Then we start looking at the enterprise software tools and identify them as what kind of information do they produce, what kind of information do these software platforms consume, and then how can they be capitalized on. We have in some backup slides, we have various use cases that help us understand and motivate, prioritize what we're doing. And so we'll work through use cases, and then we have to work through validation and verification, because clearly if you just come up with a concept like Ted was talking about, where it's just a massive amount of stuff that really doesn't have much utility, then you failed. Okay, so we have to come up with a validation verification approach, review our project plan, and then ultimately we really would like to have as many subject matters involved in this, a lot of interest, but people bellying up to the bar and getting engaged and involved, and figure out what areas they really are skilled in, and also identify a project lead, which ideally should be an owner or an EPC that's very passionate and very motivated. It's one of those things that once you have someone like that, they're kind of like the alpha. You can't let them down. You have to really drive forward as quickly as you can and provide tangible results as quickly as possible. So at the end of the workshop, we'll talk about what are the action items, what are the project execution flow, and we'll be talking about what is the agenda for the next meeting and when that'll take place. I think that's it. Let's see what's next. Next slide.
Hey, Reg.
Yes?
I just wanted to clarify too. So when we talk about project leads for folks who are on this call, I mean, what we're really saying is we want an actual project with real project data to be doing this project on, and presumably the project lead would be the owner of that data on the project.
Yeah,
so
right. I think exactly.
For folks out there who may have a project and are interested in working with us on it, you would be a perfect candidate to be a project lead.
Yep, and then recognize that in the process, what we'll do is we'll approach the information resources that you're having to deal with and talk about what are the attributes that are compelling about it and what are the limitations, and essentially streamline your efforts and focus things on things that really generate value rather than distractions.
Great. Say, we do have a couple questions.
Okay.
One person's asking, customers are always asking for capital projects to come online and start generating revenue as quickly as possible. In the last 10 years, I have seen project schedules be reduced by as much as 30%. Where is the pinch point? At what point will construction schedules exceed what can be done physically? To the point, assuming all the information systems allow information to flow perfectly, where is the weakest link in this chain? Anyone?
Ted, do you want to take
Good question.
that?
Yeah, I think that's not a question with a trivial answer. Clearly it's something I think as a community, we will hopefully find out. And but I still believe that where schedules have been reduced by 30%, it'd be interesting to see where those projects fall relative to this slide I've shown on the motivation. One of the upper bounds one of the data points that may serve as an upper bound is not this diagram, but an accompanying one where you may or may not have seen it. There's a slide that shows the difference between manufacturing and construction, and where manufacturing is a fixed assembly environment, you typically have upwards on the order of over 50% of direct utilization of time and effort. And these other areas that are shown here may be considered waste. And so it's not an apples to apples comparison, but the major point being is I think that as you drive more and better information exchanges, and as you increase utilization of the labor to actually execute the work, that manufacturing and approaching manufacturing productivity is likely our upper bound, and perhaps that's an unachievable target. But I think we will see a step change. I think there may be a few flashpoints of projects that have had such a great level of information exchange that the direct work of time spent in the field went from 2 hours to 4 hours. Perhaps a 30% productivity improvement suggests that it went from perhaps 2 to 2.7 or something like that. But where that is, and then to the question of the pinch point, I think that the pinch point could be represented as where there will be, and I really think if you're familiar with concepts of agile or lean construction, WorkFace planning really embeds the idea of the last planner concept, where you're trying to make sure that work handed off to the field is executable and you're not giving bad work. So if you're requesting bad work for the field, the end effect is you end up having people stand around. And it's not that they don't want to work, and not only does it cause a situation where they can't work because they don't have something, but it's got a corollary effect where motivation suddenly goes down, and nobody likes to be told to do something they can't do. And as that sets in not only on an individual level to a team level, your team can start to degenerate in terms of their motivation. The other aspect becomes safety. And that becomes something that we can't compromise on. There is no way that work should be done in such a expediting fashion where it's introducing unsafe work. But a recent publication from CII at the last year's annual members meeting, and so at least it was published in terms of a member meeting. I don't know if it's made it into a CII document yet, but the main point there was that there's a positive correlation in the fact that more productive projects are also safer projects. And it makes sense because you don't have people scrambling on the job site. It decreases the travel. It decreases the amount of time they're at site, not focused with the job and task at hand, which they can understand and be in a more predictable environment. And so the fact that safety correlates with, but coming back to the lean construction concepts, as we implement the last planner and we're in a mode of being able to leverage the information provided to a constructor so that their installation work packages are executable, and they can build a buffer of those packages such that it's not about micromanagement. And installation work packaging isn't about trying to dictate the exact sequence. In fact, just the opposite. It's about trying to build a buffer of executable work so that every crew on the project would have at least 4 to 6 weeks of work out in front of them where they know the materials are there, they know the information's there, they know the drawings are there, they have the permitting and things required such that they can execute that work. And at that point, that's where you see this productivity boost. Now, there's a secondary concept that I think becomes perhaps our pinch point, which becomes pool-driven information exchange. And after the installation work, packaging is achieved such that work handed to the field is executable, and we see that productivity spike, there perhaps becomes a secondary layer of driving information exchanges in a more pool-driven fashion, such that work that's happening across enterprise boundaries, where a constructor can be alerted ahead of time that something in a fabrication shop, which a human couldn't instantly see, could derail the plans 6 to 8 weeks down the line, and hence the projects can adjust at a macro level. And so, that's a long-winded answer, but at the end of the day, it's a complicated question, and it's part of what drives the excitement for me, at least, to find that pinch point and upper bound of how can we get the most productive construction systems of the future.
One of the questions that came in, this is Reg again, that came in related to a concern about when you get these blocks of information, how do you avoid the kind of the blame game where someone says, well, I acted on this, but it was incomplete or incorrect. And I'd like your take on that, Ted. But first, I'd like to comment on one of the things that we really didn't highlight is that obviously in the process of identifying these information resources, you really need to drill into as far as you can and move back upstream as far as you can to like who is the source of this information. So if you have a master scheduling software that's deriving information from an in-transit coordination tool, you really don't want to go necessarily to the master schedule per se, but you really want to have a discussion about, well, where is this information actually being manifesting itself, and is it manifesting itself in a natural way in order to execute that particular facet of the project? And that information has a higher likelihood of having the integrity and the accuracy and the completeness that you need. And then the other part of this question that I really can't elaborate on is a question about agreements or contracts that use AIA, CSI, AGC, and I don't have, I can't answer that. So, Ted, do you have any comments about that?
Well, Reg, first I just ask you to clarify the question one more time, if you could. It seemed like there were two different questions in there, perhaps.
Well, their concern is about, specifically the question is who is legally responsible for each package if something goes wrong. Architects, engineers are not responsible for contractors' means and methods, and contractors may blame the fabricator. So what type of agreements or contracts are used in order to provide that protection? And they cite AIA and CSI and AGC.
Yeah, and I think that's a very relevant question, and and it's something that is still an outstanding point. And to elaborate on it further, it ties back into. Let me jump back 2 slides here. In the concept, what I've shown here is somewhat of an EPC model, and I think that there's a corollary information model, but even in the EPC world, the same question's relevant in the sense that an engineer, or in the case of building projects, an architect may not put sufficient detail in the model to support the level of planning necessary by a constructor, and that's causing a situation whereby often there's a hesitancy to say, well, if I hand over this information and then you're using it to build upon as opposed to the drawings, that then am I responsible if you do something and you don't construct it correctly? And I think those levels of responsibility, they need to be spelled out as with the introduction of tools. And there may be good examples and there may be bad examples, but in terms of saying, well, hey, this model completely replaces a drawing, I don't think the industry is yet there. And to say that a model then somehow gets rid of the fact that there's a controlled revision in terms of release of information. So where the model may be used to support planning efforts, there needs to be the proper contractual statement saying that you're still to build according to the proper revision of the drawing, and hence being able to ensure that the virtual construction model has the appropriate version of the drawing. And that introduces something that there are 2 corollary Fiat projects looking at at least in positioning, that are aligned with our effort, in the sense that goes back to the point, often that engineering model does not have the necessary granularity and detail to support the installation, packaging, and construction planning process. And I'll give you a couple of examples. And certainly the one I'm most familiar with is piping, where it's often the case that a fabrication contractor will have the responsibility to delineate where the spool boundaries are. And part of the benefit of using 3D CAD tools for piping is, well, you can quickly lay out a pipeline, and then you can automate the process of chunking it down into drawings. And then if the responsibility of putting the spool information is associated with the spooling contractor, getting that information from the fabrication contractor to supplement the information that was done by the original engineer is absolutely necessary if you're going to have a high level of automation for being able to do installation work packages for piping. And that same principle applies into structural steel. In fact, it's even amplified there. In the area of structural detailing, I have seen not yet one project where all of the steel on that project, in fact, it's the opposite. Almost all projects, the steel detailing is a subcontractor to the shop fabricator, not to the original architect, not to the engineer, even in the EPC world. Where engineering models are more aggregated and integrated because of the nature of that contracting approach. The detailing of the structural steel and identifying the piece marks is something that becomes a subcontract to the fabricator. And then as you go into the building industry and you go into the infrastructure industry, those same principles apply. And even if it's not heavily piping driven, you especially get into road work where an initial drawing of a road is at a level where if you go into those CAD models, you'll find that there's not enough information, and a highway contractor has to dissect and break down the information in that model into another level of detail. And so I think that looking at it from the perspective of somehow all of this information for what's going to be built has to be put into the engineering model, we have to break down that perception. We've got to accept the realization that there is an incremental addition of information into the model, and that there's a successive set of phases of engineering where some of the modeling work will actually occur by the contractor in the field. And then back to the question of, well, who's responsible? Not only is that an acceptance of it from a technical standpoint in terms of the data flows, but then it needs to be properly addressed in the contractual specifications in terms of who's responsible for the management and maintenance of that model, as well as ensuring that proper construction management and construction techniques are put in place where a model's not exactly telling you what to do. There's still review cycles, there's still engineering drawings that have to be appropriately correlated with the model. And I think and this project's not going to address it, and I think some of our Fiat Tech members, certainly at the engineering software level, hopefully are. But the virtual construction model needs to be maintained in a state of proper revision control, where engineering and detailing are separate, parallel processes than the construction, and where construction that construction model may be frozen at a state of revision, so that then it represents what is actually to be built, not as what is under design. And as the tools come in place to further control that, we may ultimately move into a state where the drawing is not necessary. But I think still having constructors build upon contractual deliverables of drawings is going to remain the process by which the augmentation of virtual tools can help, but it doesn't necessarily replace the process of controlled drawing in construction processes that work off of those controlled and revised drawings.
Yeah, there's only a couple more questions left. We're running low on time anyway, but one of the questions that related to was whether or not there'd be reluctance with respect to getting crews on board with this concept. And I think that perhaps maybe I as well missed the point. Essentially, these packages already exist, and the question is do they exist in an optimal and efficient way? And so this isn't a matter of trying to get consensus and acceptance. It's really a matter of trying to provide as much fidelity and reduce anything that could be considered ambiguous or incomplete, which essentially introduces disruption to the flow of work or the flow of information. And so it's really not whether or not a group, a craft group, or any other crews and things like that are going to be having trouble getting on board with this, they're already getting these kinds of information. Ted, do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, and I certainly will. And as electronic and digital tools have been introduced, and it was one of the first experiences I had, as we introduced both, and this goes back over a decade ago, introduced both the OpSim and ConstructSim platform. It was real interesting to see the difference between an operator who could visualize startup procedures, and we even built tools to have them develop those startup procedures, but they weren't sticky in the sense that hey, they love to visualize them, but as long as somebody else put it into the model, that was what the operator. That was really the feedback that we got. Hence, it was tough to scale that. Whereas on the construction end, if you gave a model, and I'll relate it back to my point, it was critical that that virtual model represented their drawing revision state. Because if they opened up a drawing and the symbology wasn't the same, and if they couldn't click on it and that virtual model brought up the right revision of the model, not what somebody was work in process on design. So once that requirement was met, boy, did that tool become sticky. The field took a hold of it. They used it. The user interfaces have got to be simplified. You can't provide engineering level user interfaces to the field. So I think there's, yes, that's a data point, but I've seen that repeated. The field is hungry for the better tools. What's interesting is you often get kickback, and I'll jump down a few pictures here, to where if you suddenly color code the model according to engineering revision status or according to what is actually the status, you may get kickback more from engineers in the construction management level because it's like the truth of what is what suddenly gets put into the model. So there's kickback, but I think the point is still incredibly valid because we've seen a large number of failures in the field, be that the superintendents just didn't buy into it and didn't use it. In my experience, what I can relate that to is that one of the key aspects of going from a construction work package to an installation work package is realizing that whereas a construction work package you can largely fix the boundaries, it becomes a fixed representation that yes, revisions change it, and especially if you're defining your CWPs early enough, the engineering information is flowing into it, and so I'm not saying it's not dynamic, but from a planning perspective, it's more of a static element. Okay, you may be shifting dates and revisions may be changing the boundaries, but if you go in and build IWPs and leverage an automation tool to help you build them and then put them on the shelf, what you'll find on that project is you can't predict the exact flow of those IWPs ahead of time, and it's a drastic mistake to leverage an automation tool to help the team be faster at building these installation work packages and these sequences, but not realizing that due to constraints and variables that just can't be predicted. Construction is a wicked problem, and that until you're down in the weeds of actually solving it, you can't figure out the exact plan and sequence, and hence planning is separate than scheduling. So unless those packages have a fluidity to where what the package is what the field actually can do and is doing, and if there becomes a falsity on that where, okay, the superintendents initially bought in and the foreman and general foreman, but then suddenly they're having to rip pages out of packages, well, this automation approach to packaging becomes a failure, and you'll start to see in practice a disconnect between the field crews who still have to do the work and are suddenly the packaging became a paperwork exercise and isn't truly enabling them to have in their hand a set of instructions for exactly what they're doing this week. And so there's got to be a fluidity of the package boundaries, and somehow that point, I can't help but state this, for all of the advocates, that is not well understood across the board. And I'm hoping that the CII organization can draw that out better, that at an IWP level, the fluidity and the need to keep those package boundaries fluid, such that they are serving the needs of the superintendents down to the general foreman and ultimately the foreman level, so it represents the scope of work that they're actually executing, not what somebody conceptually planned ahead of time that didn't become the reality. Because when that happens, yes, a disconnect occurs, and yes, what you'll see is the field crews do not accept the tools and technology because it's not really helping them out. It's helping the project management build these packages and report upwards saying, oh yes, we're doing WorkFace planning, when in reality, it just takes a quick audit and a check to go out on a project and see, are the superintendents and crews bought into it, which means, hey, each crew has a clear understanding, and they've got packages in their hand, which represents what they're actually doing. They're not piecemealing packages and pulling, this drawing and this drawing and this drawing, in which case the chaos is set back in and those packages aren't necessarily really helping the crews. And so I think that question is extremely relevant, cannot be trivialized, and it's got to become something that we put on as a checkpoint in terms of, does the automation tool support that level of fluidity in the package definition, so that you can be publishing the packages not at the last minute, but to the point where these are executable instruction sets that are actually going to be executed, so that the will becomes the do. The can becomes the will. And those are some terms I'm throwing out there that, if you're familiar with lean construction concepts, that's key. Just because you should doesn't mean you can, and just because you can doesn't mean you will. So there's got to be an acceptance between the you can do this because it's workable work, and I will do this, which is the acceptance level of the crews in the field saying, yes, I will execute this package, and I'm not off executing something else. And that's often just lost in the details of the implementation.
Great. I think we're pretty much out of time, Nicole. Thank you for helping to set this up. We really appreciate it. And again, please come and participate in the workshop and be willing to roll your sleeves up and get engaged in this project with the other Fiat members. And we're really marching forward as quickly as possible. And any issues that you have, we have to make sure we incorporate into our project plan, so that we make sure that we give it sufficient attention. It'll be incrementally addressed, and that way we don't really push something that ends up not being useful. And the only way we're going to be successful is to have everyone that's interested engaged and actively involved. So Nicole, I don't know if your mic's on mute, or if you have any other comments.
No, Reg, I wasn't sure if you were finished, so great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Reg. Thank you, Ted. Like we said at the beginning of the hour, we've recorded this, and we'll have a copy up on the fiatech.org website in the next day or two. I hope you all can register. We have our early bird deadline March 1st and the hotel deadline March 1st. So if you're planning on making it to San Antonio, which I hope you are, we're going to have a lot of exciting presentations. It's posted on the website as well. Please take a look, and hope to see you there, and have a great day, everyone. Thanks.